How do you assess the European Commission's €1 billion plan to boost AI adoption in key industries while reducing dependence on US and Chinese technologies? So what challenges and opportunities does this create for Europe's strategic autonomy?
Thank you so much for having me here today.
Always a
pleasure.
So
indeed, the investment essentially is making sure that AI is not purely a productivity tool, but it's a strategic asset, right? And as you rightly pointed out, historically, EU was dependent on, some of the systems, processes, technologies from US and perhaps even China. So the idea here is to actually boost the sovereignty. Right? There are, of course, opportunities in terms of making Europe more, self-sufficient as there is a race for AI globally. But of course, there are challenges. And some of the challenges is, number one, shortage of talent, because obviously every country right now wants to have AI, technologies and policies and processes. Number two is regulation. So historically, European regulation was much more stringent and much more detailed. So if you look at the EU AI Act, it's very prescriptive and it's very, very detailed, right?
Yes.
And number three, really, it's a big investment, right? But we will need much more because ultimately AI is not something which you can do, in 1 year or 2 years. And as you pointed out, the EY report already said that there is a loss of 4 billion combined, right? So there is going to be much more importance for collaboration, for partnership, for sharing lessons learned between the different countries, between the different players, to make sure that we can avoid those challenges, we can avoid those, risks and concerns, and as a nation, embark on this journey and bring value to customers like you and I.
Okay, so Ms. Alina, how can Europe balance reducing reliance on foreign AI technologies with the need for international collaboration and alignment on AI standards?
Yes, so I think what is important here, that EU is building its own AI capacity, but at the same time is co-shaping the global standards, right? It's really hard to do this in isolation. So I would definitely encourage, as I mentioned, the partnerships, right? The opportunities to share that. The collaboration, the opportunities, to share the perspectives, right? And the opportunity to learn, because every nation right now is trying to do the same, right? And instead of doing this in pieces, it would be much more exciting and much more effective to, learn. Right? And as you mentioned, the collaboration is key for this.
Yes.
And I think just to stress on collaboration, it's not just collaboration between the companies, it's the collaboration between the whole ecosystem. So it's the government, the regulator, the businesses, and of course, the citizens like you and I.
Of course. So what measures should European companies take to ensure the future of AI to be made in Europe aligns with ethical standards, data privacy regulations like the GDPR, and also responsible AI principles across sectors such as healthcare, energy, and automotive, as mentioned by Mrs. von der Leyen?
Yeah, so I think what is very key here is in EU, we have very, very strict, data protection laws like GDPR that you mentioned. And of course, with the AI, it's reliant on the data. There have been, unfortunately, instances when there was data leakage, right? Or as you mentioned, there were concerns about lack of ethical AI. So I think that there are three parts to it. One is, of course, the regulation and the frameworks that promote the use of the ethical AI. Because similarly, as you wouldn't let a doctor, operate a patient without being ethical, knowledgeable, you shouldn't allow professionals to, perform AI without having this knowledge and these standards. So something, for example, which could happen is having chartered professionals in AI or technology broader to make sure that we are driven by the same goal. So that's number one. Number two, what is very, very important is when there are any concerns, and you may be aware of the concerns of deep fakes or different cybercrime, driven by AI or with the help of AI, which is kind of the back story of AI, which not is always told. So I think what is very important there is to highlight these stories, not just to the businesses, but also externally to the customers and to the humans, to make sure that we see both the positive side of AI in terms of the productivity and any concerns, right? And
Yes.
the earlier we catch those unethical behaviors and the earlier we protect our systems, our customers, the faster it's going to be possible for us, to contain it, right? And to fight against it. I think at the moment there is no particular law that prevents, that
But it is
prevents
expected
the
in the
cybercrime.
future, of course. It is expected, right?
It is expected, but I think it's also the speed at which the cybercrime is developing is quite fast with the use of the AI. And particularly the deep fakes is something which perhaps hasn't been tackled by law yet.
Okay. So there is the EY survey that highlights that many companies face initial financial losses from AI adoption due to compliance failures and biased outputs. How can European industries mitigate these risks while implementing AI technologies?
Yes, so I think what is very important, there are the parts around the compliance, right? And one of the challenges was that the regulation wasn't necessarily happening at the same speed as the transformation. So some of the companies had to balance, the speed of innovation versus the compliance. And then some of it may have become uncompliant. I think what is very, very key with the EY report is to also think about the value which AI brings. Because a lot of the customers invested in AI, but they haven't really, tackled the deep value use case, right? So they invested in technology, they trained the people, they enabled the transformation, but it hasn't really brought the ROI, which they were hoping on. And ultimately, in terms of the losses, right, it may not be just the losses in terms of fines and compliance inefficiencies, but it's actually, the value which is being delivered. And we've seen this in the past with some of the other technologies. So I think to answer your question, what is very key is to make sure that whatever you install using AI, it's very much value driven and you clearly know the ROI. You measure it, right? And you ensure at the board level that you essentially have, all the attention to the matter early in the process instead of just trialing AI because everybody is trialing it.
Okay. How can the European Commission ensure that AI innovation supports sustainability goals and avoids disruptions experienced by firms during early AI integration?
Yes, so I think what is very important here, there are two folds on this. So AI, as you may be aware, it has very strong computational demands, right? And what this means that the more AI models, the more data centers you have that ultimately enable the AI model, there is a certain negative impact on the carbon footprint and ultimately the sustainability, right? So I think that there are several points here. The first is developing the policies and the processes on the regulatory level to promote the sustainable energy investments and more importantly, to measure them, right? To measure and to report. The second one, it's there are certain, chips, there are certain, technologies like quantum computing. There are obviously the AI data centers, but there are certain ways how you can enable them using renewable energy sources. So for example, if you have the they can be distributed, and this, this is more energy efficient to reduce the overall carbon footprint. And I think the last one, which is not as often spoken about, it's making sure that we tell these stories, from the public engagement, from the storytelling, to make sure that we have these human-centric narratives to understand the urgency of adopting these cleaner energy practices.
How critical is it for Europe to create a cohesive regulatory framework that balances AI-driven economic growth with compliance to avoid reputational and operational risks?
Yes, so we already have the EU AI Act, right? So what is key now is to make sure that there is a unified framework. And it's kind of the next level of detail, because it's essentially not just telling the key principles, but telling the lessons learned, telling the case studies, making sure that the companies, even the smaller businesses, are very clear in terms of what is required. Because typically we have the large businesses that have the funds, to invest into consultancies or strategies or research. But for the small and medium businesses in particular, the more examples we have from the unified framework, the faster is going to enable the adoption and to mitigate the risks that you mentioned.